Deep in the hills of Missouri and Arkansas, there are families who have lived on the same ridges for 200 years. They speak with a dialect that linguists have traced back across an ocean. They play fiddle tunes older than the United States. They practice folk remedies passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, remedies with roots in a country most of them have never seen. For generations, outsiders called them hillbillies. Backward, isolated, cut off from the modern world. They were not cut off from anything. They were the last, best-preserved fragment of one of the most extraordinary migrations in human history. A people who crossed from the Scottish lowlands to Ulster, from Ulster to the American frontier, and from the frontier deep into the Ozark Mountains, carrying nothing but their families, their faith, their music, and their names. And those names are still here. If you carry one of them, your family did not simply move to the Ozarks. They were among the people who made the Ozarks, the Scots-Irish frontier families who turned an untamed highland into a homeland. These are 15 of those surnames, and the story of how they got here crosses 3 countries, 400 years, and one of the toughest peoples the modern world ever produced. Before the names, you need to understand who these people actually were, because almost everything popular culture tells you about them is wrong. The Scots-Irish were not Irish in the way most people assume. They were Lowland Scots and English borderers, families from the violent frontier between Scotland and England, who were resettled in the northern Irish province of Ulster during the plantation of the early 1600s. They were Presbyterian, not Catholic. They spoke Scots, not Gaelic, and they remained a distinct people in Ulster, never fully blending with the native Irish around them. Then, beginning in 1717, rising rents, religious discrimination, and poor harvests drove them across the Atlantic in enormous numbers. They landed in Pennsylvania, found the good land already taken, and turned south and west, down the Great Wagon Road into the Appalachian backcountry. And when Appalachia filled up, they kept going. Across the Mississippi, into the Ozark Plateau of Missouri and Arkansas, a rugged, isolated highland that reminded them of the hills their ancestors had always farmed. Historians of the upland South have traced this exact path, from Ulster through Appalachia into the Ozarks. These 15 surnames traveled that entire road. Number 15, Armstrong. Before the Armstrongs were an Ozark family, before they were an Ulster family, they were the single most feared riding clan on the Anglo-Scottish border. The border Reivers were the raiding families who dominated the frontier between England and Scotland for roughly 300 years, from the 13th to the early 17th century. In a lawless zone where neither crown could maintain control, these families survived by raiding, stealing cattle, extorting protection money, and feuding with one another in a cycle of violence that gave the English language the words bereaved and blackmail. The Armstrongs were the most powerful reaving family of the entire border. At their height, they could reportedly field 3,000 mounted men. They controlled the debatable lands in the Liddesdale Valley, and they answered to no king. When King James VI of Scotland finally moved to crush the border families after 1603, the Armstrongs were specifically targeted for destruction. Many were hanged. Many more were driven from their land, and a large number were resettled in Ulster. From Ulster they came to America, and from the American backcountry, Armstrong families pushed into the Ozarks, where the name remains common across Missouri and Arkansas today. The most famous Armstrong of all, Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon, descended from this border reaving stock. When he stepped onto the lunar surface, he carried a surname that had once terrorized the frontier between 2 kingdoms. If your name is Armstrong, your family was not merely tough. They descended from the most formidable outlaw riders in British history, and they brought that hardness to the Ozark Hills. Number 14, Elliot. Another of the great riding surnames of the Scottish border, the Elliots, spelled with 1 T or 2, were a Liddesdale clan, close allies and neighbors of the Armstrongs, and among the most active reaving families of the entire frontier. The Elliots followed the same road as every family on this list. Crushed and scattered after the union of the crowns in 1603, many were transplanted to Ulster. From Ulster they joined the Great Migration to the American colonies, and from the colonies they moved down the Appalachian spine and westward into the Ozark highlands. The border reaving families shared a distinctive culture that survived this entire journey intact, a culture built on kinship, loyalty to family above all else, deep suspicion of outside authority, and a readiness to answer insult with violence. Historians have argued that this culture, forged on the Anglo-Scottish frontier, became the template for the culture of the entire American backcountry, including the Ozarks. If your name is Elliot, your ancestors rode the most dangerous border in Britain, survived the destruction of their world, and carried their fierce independence across an ocean and half a continent to the mountains of Arkansas and Missouri. Number 13. Graham. The Grahams were one of the largest and most notorious of all the border reaving families, concentrated on the western march around the debatable land, the strip of contested territory that neither England nor Scotland officially controlled. The Grahams were so troublesome to the crown that after 1603, they were subjected to one of the most systematic removals of any border family. Hundreds were forcibly deported, some to the Netherlands, many to Ireland. The name seeded itself across Ulster, and from there followed the now familiar path to America and into the backcountry. What makes the border families so important to the Ozark story is the nature of the land they chose. When Scots-Irish families reached America, they did not settle the coastal plains or the rich tidewater farmland. They pushed into the hills, the Appalachians first, then the Ozarks, because highland country was what they knew. Their ancestors had farmed contested upland for centuries. The mountains were not an obstacle to them. They were home. If your name is Graham, your bloodline ran through the most fought-over ground in Britain, and it found its way to the most rugged highland in the American interior. Number 12. Bell. The Bells were a riding family of the western Scottish border, closely tied to the Armstrongs and Grahams, and part of the same reaving network that dominated the frontier for centuries. The name Bell is deceptively simple. It may derive from the Old French belle, meaning handsome, or from residence near a bell, a church bell or a town bell, or from the sign of an inn. But on the border, Bell meant one thing: a member of one of the riding clans, bound by blood to the vast web of frontier families who lived by the raid. Bell families followed the migration to Ulster, then to America, and Bell is a common surname throughout the Ozark region today. Here is something remarkable about these families. Across 200 years and thousands of miles, they tended to migrate together, not as individuals, but as clusters of interrelated families who had known one another in Ulster, and whose ancestors had known one another on the Scottish border. Armstrong, Elliot, Graham, and Bell families settled near one another in Appalachia, and near one another again in the Ozarks. The kinship networks forged on a British frontier held together across an entire ocean. If your name is Bell, your family was one thread in a web of border kin that stayed connected from the Scottish marches to the Missouri hills. Number 11. Johnston. The Johnstons were one of the most powerful clans of the western Scottish border, famous for a centuries-long blood feud with the neighboring Maxwell family, a feud so violent it culminated in a battle in 1593 that left the Maxwell chief dead and hundreds of men killed. Note the spelling. Johnston, with a T, is the Scottish border form, literally John's tune, John's settlement. It is distinct in origin from Johnson, meaning son of John, though the two names blurred together over centuries in America. Across the Ozarks, both spellings appear, carried by descendants of border families who often lost or altered a letter somewhere along the 200-year road from Ulster. The Johnstons followed the same path as their fellow border clans: resettlement in Ulster, migration to the American colonies, and expansion into the backcountry and beyond. If your name is Johnston, and especially if it carries that border form T, your family likely descended from one of the great feuding clans of the Scottish frontier, a people for whom loyalty to kin was not sentiment, but survival. Before we continue, if this is showing you a history you never knew you had, subscribe to Legacy Remains. We uncover the stories hidden inside the names people carry. Hit subscribe, and the next video will already be waiting. Number 10. Campbell. The Campbells were one of the largest and most powerful clans in all of Scotland. Not a border family, but a Highland and Western clan whose power was centered in Argyll. And Campbell is one of the most common Scots-Irish surnames in the entire Ozark region. The Campbell story diverges slightly from the border Reivers. Many Campbell families came to Ulster as part of the broader Lowland and Western Scottish migration of the 17th century, drawn by cheap land and low rents in a province that was, on a clear day, visible across just 20 miles of water from the Scottish coast. By the late 1600s, perhaps 100,000 Lowland Scots had settled in Ulster, a Presbyterian Scots-speaking community that remained culturally distinct from the native Irish around them. When economic and religious pressures pushed them across the Atlantic beginning in 1717, they brought their clan names with them. Campbell was among the most numerous. If your name is Campbell, your family was part of the single largest Scottish migration to Ireland, and then part of the largest Ulster migration to America, a name that crossed 2 seas to reach the Ozark Hills. Number 9. Stuart. Stuart, and its variant Stuart, carries one of the most storied names in all of Scottish history. It was the name of the royal house that ruled Scotland for over 3 centuries and eventually inherited the throne of England as well. But the vast majority of Ozark Stuarts do not descend from kings. The surname originated as an occupational name from the steward, the official who managed a great household or estate. It became enormously common across Lowland Scotland, and it traveled to Ulster with the plantation migration, and to America with the Scots-Irish. The name is a reminder of something important about these families. They were not aristocrats. They were farmers, herders, weavers, and laborers, ordinary people from the Scottish lowlands and the Ulster plantation, seeking land and freedom on a distant frontier. The grandeur of a name like Stuart tells you nothing about wealth. It tells you about origin, the Scottish lowlands by way of Ulster, by way of the American backcountry. If your name is Stuart, your family carried one of Scotland's most famous names into the humblest and most demanding of new worlds. Number 8. Reid. Reid, also spelled Reed, Reed, or Reed, is one of the most common surnames across the Scots-Irish diaspora, and it appears throughout the Ozarks. In its Scottish form, Reid, the name most often derives from a nickname for a person with red hair or a ruddy complexion, from the older Scots Reed, meaning red. Red hair was, and remains, notably common among people of Scottish and Ulster descent, and the surname records an ancestor whose coloring was distinctive enough to name him by it. Reed families were part of the Lowland Scottish population that flooded into Ulster in the 17th century and crossed to America in the 18th. Like most Scots-Irish families, they gravitated toward the frontier highlands, Appalachia first, and then, for many, the Ozarks. The variation in spelling, Reed, 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 is itself a fingerprint of the Scots-Irish experience. On a frontier where literacy was low and spelling was fluid, the same family might have its name recorded 3 different ways in 3 different documents. If your name is Reed or Reed, your family carried a Lowland Scottish name through Ulster and into the American hills, and the spelling shifted with every clerk who wrote it down. Number 7. Patterson. Patterson means son of Patrick, and it is one of the most distinctively Ulster-Scots surnames a family can carry. The name is fascinating precisely because of that root. Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland, and the name reflects the complex identity of the Ulster-Scots, a Scottish and Presbyterian people living in Ireland, whose naming absorbed Irish influence even as they remained culturally distinct from the native Irish population. Patterson families were heavily concentrated in the Ulster plantation counties, and they emigrated to America in large numbers during the great Scots-Irish migrations of the 18th century. The name is common throughout Appalachia and the Ozarks. If your name is Patterson, your family sits at the exact cultural crossroads that define the Scots-Irish, Scottish in origin, seasoned in Ulster, and carried to the American frontier by people who were neither fully Scottish nor fully Irish, but something new that the frontier would reshape again. Number 6. MacDonald. The Mic and Mac prefix, meaning son of in Gaelic, is one of the clearest markers of Scottish and Ulster ancestry a surname can carry. And MacDonald, son of Donald, is among the most common of them all across the Ozark region. MacDonald descends from Clan Donald, historically the largest of the Scottish Highland clans. Members of the clan and families bearing the name spread into the Scottish lowlands and across to Ulster over centuries, and joined the Scots-Irish migration to America. The persistence of the Mek prefix through 300 years and 2 ocean crossings is remarkable. It would have been easy to drop. Many families anglicized their names on the frontier, shortening and simplifying them. But the Mek endured, a stubborn linguistic badge of Gaelic origin carried by families who had otherwise become thoroughly American. If your name begins with Mek or Mac, your family preserved a fragment of the Gaelic world across an extraordinary distance, a single syllable that survived everything the road from Scotland to the Ozarks could throw at it. Number 5. Wilson. Wilson, son of Will or William, is one of the most common surnames in the entire Scots-Irish world, and one of the most common in the Ozarks. It is a Lowland Scottish and border name of enormous frequency. William was among the most popular given names across Lowland Scotland and Ulster, and the patronymic Wilson multiplied accordingly. The name was carried to Ulster in the plantation, to America in the Great Migration, and into the backcountry and the Ozark highlands by frontier families. Wilson illustrates a key feature of Scots-Irish naming, the overwhelming dominance of a small pool of traditional given names. William, John, James, Robert, Andrew, Samuel. These names recur endlessly, generation after generation, producing a landscape of Wilsons, Johnsons, Jamesons, Robertsons, Andersons, and Samuelsons. The repetition was not lack of imagination. It was reverence for family, sons named for fathers and grandfathers in an unbroken chain. If your name is Wilson, your family was part of the deep mainstream of Scots-Irish settlement, carrying one of the most common frontier names into the Ozark Hills. Number 4. Baker. Not every Ozark settler surname is Scottish in origin. The Scots-Irish were the largest group, but they were not alone, and Baker represents the English and English border stream that settled the highlands alongside them. Baker is an occupational English surname, one who baked. It is common across the Anglo-Scottish border counties of northern England, Cumberland, Westmoreland, Northumberland, the very counties, along with the Scottish Lowlands, that historians identify as the origin of an estimated 90% of Appalachia's earliest settlers. This is a crucial and often missed point. The people we call Scots-Irish were not purely Scottish. They were a border people, drawn from both sides of the Anglo-Scottish frontier, including the northern English counties. English border families like the Bakers migrated alongside the Lowland Scots, shared their culture, and settled the same highlands. If your name is Baker, your family may well have come from the English side of the same violent frontier and traveled the same road to the same Ozark Hills as their Scottish neighbors. Number 3. Hall. Hall is another English border surname, common throughout the northern English counties and the Scottish frontier. It is a name of place and status, originally denoting someone who lived or worked at a hall, the manor house or principal dwelling of a settlement. The Halls were, in fact, one of the recognized riding surnames of the English Middlemarch, a border family in their own right, part of the same reaving world as the Armstrongs and Grahams on the other side of the line. Hall families followed the border to Ulster to America path, and Hall is a widespread surname across the Ozark region. The English border Reivers are the forgotten half of the Scots-Irish story. Popular history remembers the Scottish clans, but the frontier that produced this culture had two sides, and the English families, Hall, Baker, Robson, Milburn, Charlton, were every bit as much a part of it. When they reached America, English and Scottish border families were indistinguishable, bound by a shared frontier culture that mattered more than which side of the line their grandfathers had raided from. If your name is Hall, your family may have ridden the English side of the border and carried that same hard frontier inheritance to the Ozarks. Number 2. Cox. Cox is a name that reveals how deep and how ordinary the Scots-Irish and border migration actually was. Cox has multiple possible origins. It can be English, from a nickname or from the word cock. It can be Welsh, and it appears across both England and the Scottish border regions. What matters for the Ozark story is not the precise etymology, but the pattern. Cox is one of the many common British surnames that flooded into the backcountry with the great 18th century migration and became deeply rooted in the upland south and the Ozark highlands. The families who settled the Ozarks were, overwhelmingly, ordinary people with ordinary names. For every storied border reaver surname like Armstrong, there were dozens of Coxes, Bakers, Halls, and Reeds, plain names carried by plain families who did something extraordinary. They walked into an unmapped highland with axes and rifles and built a world. If your name is Cox, your family was part of the great anonymous mass of frontier settlers, the ordinary people whose names fill the oldest cemeteries in the Ozark Hills. Number 1, Boone. There is no more perfect name to end on, because the story of the surname Boone is the story of the entire Scots-Irish and backcountry migration, compressed into a single family. Boone is of English origin, likely from the old French bon, meaning good, or from a place name in Devon. The Boone family were English Quakers who came to Pennsylvania, and from there followed the exact migration path this entire video has traced. Down the Great Wagon Road, into the Appalachian backcountry, and westward into the frontier. And one member of the family became the single most famous frontiersman in American history. Daniel Boone, born in Pennsylvania in 1734, embodied everything the backcountry migration produced. He was a hunter, a trailblazer, and a pathfinder who explored and settled the Kentucky wilderness when it was still the far edge of the known frontier. He blazed the wilderness road through the Cumberland Gap, the very passage through which tens of thousands of Scots-Irish and backcountry families poured into the West. And in the final chapter of his life, Daniel Boone did exactly what the families in this video did. He moved west again, across the Mississippi, into Missouri, into the eastern edge of the Ozark country, seeking room and freedom on a still wilder frontier. He died in Missouri in 1820. His path, Pennsylvania, to the backcountry, to the trans-Mississippi West, is the Ozark settlers' path exactly. The Boone family were not Scots-Irish. They were English Quakers, and that is precisely why the name belongs at number 1, because it proves that the settlement of the Ozarks was never about one single ethnic group. It was a frontier culture, forged from Lowland Scots, Ulster Presbyterians, English borderers, and English Quakers, all melted together on the long road west into something genuinely new, the American backcountry people. If your surname appeared anywhere in this video, Armstrong, Elliott, Graham, Bell, Johnston, Campbell, Stewart, Reed, Patterson, McDonald, Wilson, Baker, Hall, Cox, or Boone, your family was part of that migration. They crossed from the Old World's most violent frontier to the New World's wildest edge. They chose the hardest land available again and again because hardship was in their inheritance and independence was worth more to them than comfort. And when they reached the Ozark Mountains, they finally stopped. Not because they were beaten, because they had found at last a highland worth keeping. 15 surnames, 15 threads running back through Ozark hollers and Appalachian ridges, through the ships of the Great Migration, through the plantation of Ulster, and all the way to the raiding frontier between Scotland and England, the most violent border in Britain, where these families learned the toughness that would carry them across an ocean and half a continent. Your name is not just a name, it is a road. It runs from a Scottish valley to an Irish province to an American mountain, walked by people who refused to bow, refused to settle for less than freedom, and refused to stop until they found country that felt like home. Drop your surname in the comments. Tell me which part of the Ozarks or Appalachia your family settled. And if your name wasn't on this list, tell me anyway, because nearly every old mountain family has a thread that runs back to that same frontier. Hit subscribe to Legacy Remains. Another name, another bloodline, another history that nobody told you was yours.